Normally, Joe, the Fed minute's kind of like a bologna sandwich, right? You know
well, this time, yeah.
You know what you're going to get ahead of time. You know, you have it. It doesn't really satisfy you. It's nothing exciting. Is it going to be different this time with the minutes?
Unfortunately, Brian, it's not. I mean, the minutes can be interesting because it gives you the context and detail about what the Fed is thinking. Had we not heard from Powell last week, then the minutes people would comb through it for every little word and nuance. But in light of Powell's comments, and I want to say something else. Powell's comments, if you notice, they were, as he was speaking, he was reading from a piece of paper, so he wanted to be very certain that what he said was interpreted correctly. Clearly, it was edited. Somebody else had likely read it. So that basically makes the minute stale today because the chair effectively did a 180 from where the Fed was back in December, for which these minutes are accountable for.
So do you think effectively the minutes today will be a longer version of the paper that Powell read from?
No, it'll probably talk a little bit about the risks. It'll probably sound a lot less worried about financial markets, Brian, because, as you know, after that Fed press conference, which was a disaster, equity markets moved significantly lower, credit spreads widened. So the minutes are going to be stale. People will read them. I'll look at them, but they'll be stale.
Well, listen, I'll push back a little bit on that, Joe, only because I'd say this. This is a new and untested Federal Reserve. About half the Fed governors are new to the job. Powell has obviously made some slip-ups. Isn't there a chance that just because of they're sort of inexperienced, there's a chance they could screw it up in the minutes?
It's possible. I think the market now is given, Powell just spoke last week and it was such a seminal event in some sense, and you've got now the meeting that's only 3 weeks away or thereabouts. I think the market's going to probably look to that. If the meeting was a little bit further out, I'd say maybe the minutes are more interesting. But he was so clear, Brian, in his flexibility and not worrying about inflation and being sensitive to what was happening to asset markets. I just think it was such a big deal that it just basically renders everything beforehand pretty much irrelevant.
So then what, if this is the bologna sandwich then of economic news, what will be the next most important piece of data that you do believe, Joe, is important to our viewers?
So in the U.S., especially with the government shutdown lingering and potentially impacting data releases, all the sentiment type indicators, so at the ISM we had on January 3rd, that series is important. Consumer and business confidence, we'll want to follow those numbers. And also, Brian, we want to follow data out of Europe and Asia, specifically China, which markets have been doing. Because what's happened and why the markets reacted so violently to Powell isn't just the concern that the U.S. is slowing, but that the U.S. is slowing against a much weaker global backdrop. And then the last point is I'd watch credit markets, investment grade, high yield, the senior loan market. Those are instruments in markets that weakened pretty dramatically late last year, in addition to the equity market. And that was something the Fed was also watching.
Do you think that the next piece of economic data will be kind of ignored because the government shut down?
Possibly. I mean, I think the problem is going to happen that, a lot of the weakness late in the month hasn't shown up in some of the data we're still yet to get, meaning that the sentiment numbers for January will reflect late December. And it's possible markets could get worried again about the extent of this year's projected slowdown in growth and earnings. So I think some of the data will be important. But right now, we're going to get to January 3rd. It's going to be a big date. And Powell gets a chance to flip-flop again. I hope not, because he's got a press conference again at all these meetings this year.